Well, g'day everybody. I've been in the country today. It's been a beautiful family day. We've had a family birthday and it's been gorgeous. You will have seen some of it from the B-roll. And here we are in this amazing Australian landscape. Now, today I'm starting something new. It's a little bit of a test. It's a test for a new part of the channel, and it's kind of about news. It's news, but I want to go into the news in a little bit more depth than just talking about highlights. So I'm going to have a bit of a go, talk about a couple of things going on in the world that are happening right now, and present it. And I'd love to hear what you guys think. So let's whiz on back to the studio now, and you can give me some feedback. That'd be great. Okay, bye. See you there. Let's go. Well, g'day everybody. It is so lovely. Thank you for sticking with me as we jump from the country back into the studio. And well, this is just a little beta test of this idea of me being able to talk about photography, filmmaking, and general tech subjects, tech issues. It won't always just be specific to photography, because I'm interested in a lot of things. I'm very interested in solar energy and batteries and all that sort of stuff. So I'll probably talk a little bit about that in the future as well. If that's okay, let me know. I'd love to know if you're interested in that stuff too. And here we are for the news and current affairs test beta version. Let's jump right on in. Now, some of you may have read that things are changing with this piece of software here. Now, I just want to give you a quick 1-minute history. Aperture came out, I think, in 2005 as the camera industry, the digital camera industry was exploding, and DSLR cameras came in and the prices came down in about 2004, and for $1,000 to $2,000 you could buy a camera which was a crop sensor, 6 megapixels, something like that, and this is where Canon and Nikon exploded into this new world. So that was almost 15 years ago. Aperture came out a year or two later to solve our problems of storing our images and being able to catalog them, to look after them, to manage them, because management of these ever-growing catalogs started to become a thing. And Apple thought about it, and they did a great job. Aperture is a piece of software that I've loved. I still use it today, 14 odd years after it came out. And I'll tell you a couple of things that I love about it the most. One is the ease of use. Being able to get images out, a selection of images out straight into an email, you could do with one click. Being able to create proof sheets and all those sorts of things, just 1 or 2 clicks. And Apple were doing this from the start. They were doing it from way, way back. And at the same time, people were using things like Adobe Bridge to work this stuff out. And back when I looked at that, all those years ago, there was just simply no comparison. And over the years, Aperture improved. It continued to be a piece of software that maybe it wasn't always on the cutting edge for all the features, but if you just wanted to import images, do basic corrections, and when I say basic, I just mean everything other than pixel editing, really, which is what Photoshop is for. You could do it all in there in a non-destructive fashion. There's no layers or anything like that. It's just all non-destructive, and get them out. And that is 99% of my work never needs to go into Photoshop. The thing I liked about this the most, besides the workflow, the speed. This is still, today, in 2019, the fastest RAW exporter to JPEG that I've seen, because of course Apple made it, and they optimized it for their hardware. So that's Aperture and why we love it. But what's happened? Well, Aperture is no more. Well, not quite no more. What's happening here? Well, I can tell you what's happening here. As of OS 10.15, Apple have said that version, which will come out later this year, will not support Aperture. So that's where we're at. Now that's a big deal if people have got catalogs and archives that they want to keep using and keep running into the future, which I'm one of those people. Now, this kind of comes as no surprise because in 2014, Apple stopped developing Aperture. And so every year I've thought, when is it going to break? When is the next OS update going to break Aperture and it's not going to work anymore? Luckily, just before they stopped development, they made it 64-bit. And so we've been able to run it in this 64-bit space. But there's something they're doing with 10.15, which they say is going to stop it from working. So this is a big deal. This is a big deal. Now, as I've already said, I still find it to be the quickest workflow. I've used Lightroom. I'm not a big fan. And I believe the new Lightroom, which I've had a little play with, because I do own the Adobe Suite, because I use Photoshop, I use InDesign, and I use Illustrator. But I've never really loved what Lightroom does. And I know they've kept two versions, the classic and the new version, because I think a lot of people preferred the classic over the new version. Anyway, I feel Lightroom is light on for Lightroom. I've settled on Capture One, which does a lot of what Aperture does, and it does some things better, but just for speed and workflow, Aperture is still faster than everything, which is amazing because it hasn't been touched in 5 years. So what does this mean? What does it mean for me when I've got a catalogue of images? I was actively using Aperture up until 2017, still putting images from my Nikon D810 and my Sony A7R, my Hasselblad and so on, although I only put the JPEGs in there because Hasselblad has its own unique software, Focus, which is okay. What does this mean for people like me? It means that we've got a catalogue now, which I still actively use my catalogue. I probably have about 500,000 images of client work over the last 15 years and my back catalogue, which I use in books and calendars, and I have clients ringing up saying, hey, have you got this? And I might have photographed it and I can dig it out. I can find it quite quickly and dig it out and still edit it. Amazing. So what does this mean for me? It means I have to keep a computer at 2019 working really for the rest of my active professional life. And to be on the safe side, you'd probably have two. It's either do that, keep a computer running from 2019, or transfer all this stuff to something else. Now, Apple says you can go to Photos. I don't think Photos has the same editing power. I probably should create a test archive to see what happens and what it looks like, but it sounds like a nightmare to me. And then the other option is to re-import every single RAW file, 500,000 of them, into something else that's hopefully going to last for the rest of my career. And really, it should be able to go beyond that. It should be more than the next 20 odd years. So from my perspective, Apple is a company that has serviced this professional user base. At the time that Aperture came out, everybody considered Apple to be the place that filmmakers, the place that musicians, the place that photographers, graphic designers, Apple was their platform of choice, and you would go there for reliability and future-proofing and less bugs and less crashes and all those sorts of things. That was the idea, and that's what Apple traded on. And many of us stuck with Apple for years, paying a premium for these things that were real. They're absolutely real. But what that did is create a halo of the software that Apple created to service the photographic industry, like Final Cut Pro services the filmmaking industry, we thought would be here for the duration of our professional life. Like if someone's 30 years old and they're going to be a photographer for the next 30 years, you're going to expect that that tool is going to stick with you because you need it to stick with you. And what's Apple done? After less than a decade, ceased development on this software.
So Apple, I'm really disappointed, and it's completely in your hands as to whether you make photos more realistic for people like me who've got these massive archives which are still being referenced and still will be referenced without us having to take the other option, which is to re-import them into a newer piece of software that hopefully goes the distance. Because, you know, Apple, a year ago, you were the biggest company in the world by market cap. You make billions of dollars in profit every year. You have, I think, something over $100 billion sitting in cash in the bank. There's no real reason why you couldn't have kept this going for your very loyal followers that keep buying, having to upgrade their machines every couple of years. We keep putting money back into Apple. And of course, when something fundamental like this happens, you know, my favorite cataloging software doesn't work on Apple anymore, it doesn't work anymore, is that an opportunity to jump ship? Because if everything else is cross-platform, maybe. Apple, think about it. Think about how much your reliance is on the iPhone, which it has been for the last decade or so. You've just been making billions from it, and that's changing, as we all know. So Apple, I'm disappointed. It isn't good enough, and maybe you can still address it in the next 6 months. Probably not. These things probably have a long tail. So that's it in regards to Aperture. Now, why do I have a picture of the beautiful Nikon Z7 here? The second little thing that I wanted to have a talk about was just a little bit of thought I've had about the revolution of photography, and the fact that we now have the potential with the Z7, as was announced back in February, to shoot 4K film in 12-bit RAW. Every single frame is a 12-bit RAW. So what does this mean? We have a 12-bit RAW file for every frame. But at 4K, does it have any real impact? Let's cut it down, 4K. But what I wanted to talk about is obviously next is going to be 8K. Let's get through 4K first. So 4K RAW 12-bit. It's going to be coming this year from Nikon. Now that's a 3840 by 2160 resolution image. Sounds kind of big. Well, it's not that big. It's an 8.29 megapixel still. So right now we can be getting 8 megapixels stills off every single shot, of every single frame that we shoot. Okay, that's interesting. That's fun. It's takes us back a decade as to what cameras were doing, but in theory, it's a great thing. And what I had wondered with RED cameras, who can already shoot 8K RAW today and have done for a little while, obviously they're like $50, $60, $70, $80,000, but they can do it. What happens when the Z7 or the A7R 5, yes, or Canon, they come out with their 8K thing, and suddenly for the price of a Z or the higher end cameras, so let's say somewhere between $2,000 and $5,000, we can now buy an 8K camera that records in RAW, and every single frame is a 12-bit RAW file. What does that mean? Well, I think it's a really interesting thing. So 8K RAW 12-bit. So how big is that? That's 7,680 by 4,320 pixels. Now that is a lot. 4K and 8K are quite different. That becomes 33.17 megapixels. More than enough pretty much for everybody to get the prints that they want. I've always said I don't need any more resolution in my cameras. I am happy for this resolution war to stop, and you can work on dynamic range and speed and battery life and things like that. No more resolution, it's fine. In a 35mm sensor, please don't give us any more. We don't really need it for 99.9999% of uses. I think it's a waste of energy for the R&D departments of camera manufacturers to just try and squeeze more out of those little as they're called. So what does this mean? What is the idea? What happens? Let's think about it. Let's talk about it. Let's discuss it. You have every single frame is a 33 megapixel RAW 12-bit image. Does that mean we have yet again in the camera industry another major disruption to photographers, because basically photographers might be replaced somewhat by videographers who just kind of cover everything and then they frame grab. Is this a crazy idea? Am I being crazy here? Or is this a potential for the future? I don't know. But I have to say, being someone who loves filmmaking and who loves photography, this convergence of the two is both interesting and scary at the same time. I love the moment of the still and the fact that it gives you this unique frozen piece of time. Whereas video is a completely different thing, and even the movement or zooming, any movement within the frame, they're different disciplines and different skills. So in a way, I would continue to love to have the still. I wonder though, as we move forwards, will the still just simply disappear and we just have images derived from motion pictures? Could this be a future that's coming not too far down the road? I don't know. I don't know if there's already out there people doing it, happily doing it at 4K, at 8 megapixel. I do hear about the odd person saying, oh yeah, we're shooting this event and that event and we can do a frame grab. Well, even a 4K or even a 4K frame grab, as we can see, is only 8 megapixels. It's not a lot for professional magazine billboard usage. But when 8K comes along and you can do the same sort of thing, that might change everything. Especially if it's in our hands, not for 50 grand, but for 5 grand. Anyway, this is tech, this is looming, this is coming. I think it's kind of exciting. I'm talking about this as this is sometime in the future. Well, it's kind of not really. It's pretty much just about here. Who is going to be first to market on this? And would you believe Canon, of course, is saying, yes, it's on our roadmap, but they haven't committed to time. And of course, I'm very sure it's on Nikon's roadmap, seeing as they're working so hard with the two Zs in getting raw 4K. And they were the first to do it with a 35mm sensor. First to talk about it anyway. They may not be the first to market with it, but they were the first to talk about it. But of course, Sharp at CES revealed an 8K working prototype micro 4/3 camera. And they are saying it's going to be out this year. So the future has arrived yet again. Here it is, before we can even manage to catch up with it, before our computers can even hardly handle 4K and our storage can handle 4K, 8K is arriving at the station. And like I said, I do think there's a convergence happening here. I do think it'll have an impact. I'm just not quite sure what that impact will be. Of course, it'll take a little while. The technology will arrive, and then it'll take another 3 or 4 years for it to have an impact. But to me, it's just like digital photography. Digital photography arrived, and I reckon it took about another 5 to 7 years before its arrival had an impact on the actual industry. Well, I think it will, but it might be 10 years from now. 5 to 10 years from now, I think we'll see this having an impact on the industry. This to me is a great discussion point. I would love to hear what you guys think about the idea of 8K motion picture, motion stills, and people frame grabbing their stills from each frame. What do you think about that? Could that be a future? Would people do it? Yes, of course it's going to take up a lot of space and a lot of time, but might that be the next pray and spray that we've talked about since digital arrived? I'd love to hear your thoughts about it. And going back to Aperture, who out there is still using it? Who out there ever did use it? I'd absolutely love to know your thoughts on Aperture. It's still my favorite. I think we should lobby Apple and get them to do something more than they've done, which is absolutely nothing. They do have a couple of billion in the bank, quite a lot of billions in the bank. All right, everybody. Well, thank you so much for watching. It's been so good to have this first beta news / current affairs / discussion. I really do want to hear your feedback. Don't hold back with the feedback. I want to understand whether it works, whether I should do it differently. Is it even a good idea at all? It'd be really good to know. But anyhow, to keep me moving forwards, please share, of course. Then I'll get more feedback. Please like, because then it gets out there more and I get more feedback. Please subscribe. Then you can make sure you're still around for the next one and you can give me more feedback. It'd all be amazing. And I very much look forward to seeing you very soon. Thanks and bye for now. Oh, I love this. This is my Pantone. I got 6 or 12 of these. I think I got 2 lots of 6. So this is actually a Pantone color. I love this one. See ya. It's going to be good. See you there.
Wenn ich